Why is curating important in and for Africa? Find a personal project on a subject you have a fervent passion for or a deep loathing for. Either direction will evoke emotion that forces you to move. And it's that level of involvement that makes images important. The bigger focus should always be on finding your own voice. This quote is an excerpt from an email response I received from American documentary photographer Billy Weeks. I had reached out to him in 2015 for advice on my debut photo documentary series titled Colorism: Shades of Africa. I have carried his words with me since, and they form an integral part on not just the projects I'm a part of, but the very power of my own voice and the voice of those around me. My name is Towela Kams. I'm a photographer, filmmaker, and emerging curator, but I'm also just Towela, a young Black African immigrant woman attempting to make meaning of her place in the arts and the place of art in Africa. Curating could very simply be described as the selecting, organizing, and presenting of objects for display. But as a multi-layered function in the African context, curating also serves as a historical conversation on African identity. It is a discursive visual of the generational challenges of African, but it is also a re-envisioning of our collective aspirations for social, economic, and political liberation. This focus becomes crucial when observing the various agents and stakeholders that engage with Curating Africa and their positionality in relation to authorship and agency of what is commonly referred to as the African narrative. The distinction I draw in the title of this knowledge share, the Curating in Africa and Curating for Africa in tandem, is one I'm interested in unpacking with care, and according to my own personal experiences in thinking about this over the last 8 years. The idea of curating in exists as a response within a wider Western framework of curating out. That is, how Africa's objects, landscapes, and even people have been outsourced by the West. I'm particularly concerned with the level of access given to Africans in playing a part in the making of what is essentially their own continental portrait in a global group photograph. This unauthorized practice of curating Africa out of context prioritize a refined consumption of an Africa that sits well on the taste buds of the West and conveniently at the detriment of our dignity. At this point, I'd like to give an illustration based on the true life story that occurred over a century ago that still echoes consequences and also lessons still relevant to today. 23 years old, 4 feet, 11 inches, 103 pounds, brought from the Kasai River in the Congo Free State, exhibited each afternoon during September. This was the sign placed on Otabenga, a Congolese man exhibited alongside wild animals in a human zoo in 1904 at the St. Louis Art Fair. The New York Times reported thousands of Americans gathering for the exhibit, many of which found him entertaining. 10 years later, Otabenga built a ceremonial fire, danced around it, and shot himself in the heart with a borrowed pistol. Today, the analogy of Otabenga's story might explain the West's obsession with African performativity. It exposes its agenda to depict African identity as primitive in a capitalist world. This stereotype deprives African art practitioners of thriving in the art world as practicing professionals and as catalysts for change. We end up building ceremonial fires with the West applauding as we dance. They aim pistols at our hearts, and there lies an immense loss of valid African experiences left unexplored. To curate in is therefore to initiate repatriations of control and restoration of the African narrative back to Africans who deserve no less than the authorship rights to this multidimensional story of a diverse Africa. In experiencing the work of curators who have successfully curated in, such as Sana Ginwala of Everyday Lusaka in Zambia, It has become my life's mission and the focus of my work to continue to work towards this and to urge others to adopt the same along the way. The effect of this restoration, I'd like to think, would primarily result in a profound reconciliation between Africans and African identity, in a way that places the African at the center of its past, present, and future. Once this reconciliation is set in motion, we begin to open ourselves up to ideas, solutions, representations, and aspirations in a continental language that permeates clearer ways of seeing, beginning with the African audience first and then overflowing across seas. Curating in Africa, as we've highlighted above, is in fact curating for Africa. Africans need to combat the erasability of African experiences in art by showing the dynamic plurality of our stories and the stories of those around us. Africans need to repurpose the language of art towards serving the cultural antidote for reclaiming our evolving identities as proud Africans. Africans need to prioritize engaging African audiences by making art that is both relatable and accessible, art that is made, approved, and enjoyed by Africans. During 2021, I was appointed as head curator for a series of virtual exhibitions on Google Arts and Culture on behalf of the AL for the Arts inaugural showcase on the esteemed platform. AL for the Arts is an organization focused on supporting the next generation of young African creatives by providing them with opportunities to further their careers. I worked with over 30 female young African artists from over 17 African countries to highlight over 250 artworks that redefine womanhood through challenging gender stereotypes, overturning beauty standards, and amplifying the role of women in activism, among other powerful themes of the exhibitions. It is available as a permanent living archive on Google Arts and Culture. In my curator's statement for the exhibition, I talk about the importance of the gradual attempts for artists to engage with the question, what does it mean to be an African, and how that ignites a flame that nudges others to do the same. It is then that we are collectively reminded of the sound of our individual voices and how beautiful we sound in the presence of each other. Each of these young women's voices exercised in the exhibition are an example of their artistic agency and embodies, embraces, and emulates the various aspects of womanhood in all of the 250 artworks. At one point or another, these different voices become a polyphonic kaleidoscope of ideas, imaginations, and stories that invite the viewer to not just see along, but to sing along. Today, I pay homage to artists like Jemima Golo, Gail Were, and Tracy Keza, who formed part of this exhibition. They filled the holes in our hearts by exploring the fullness of the African experience. They have united African audiences that find healing through their respective crafts, and they've set aflame ceremonial fires that remind us of who we are. It is also 2021 that I collaborated with London-based curator Catherine Finity to develop Curating Africa, a 10-week class on the importance of utilizing art curating skills to address Africa's socioeconomic problems. Curating Africa launched on campus at the African Leadership Academy in 2020, and it continues to offer mentorship to art student enterprises on campus and provide students with an experience of South Africa's vast art sphere in order to inspire them to take careers in the art. Curating Africa has since been added to the creative arts curricular program offerings at the African Leadership Academy and was included in the African Leadership Academy's 2020-2021 annual report for the creative arts. This vision, as I mentioned above in Curating Africa's mission, is not just industry restrictive. While the arts has a potential to bring this to life in a sensory way for the African audiences themselves form part of a range of industries that curate Africa, whether that be in curating policies for the continent curating technological advances that are African specific, for example. The list goes on. It is here that everyone's participation and involvement are cemented with a new standard for success that is mutually beneficial for all Africans. If you are still wondering why it is important to curate in Africa and for Africa, perhaps the answer lies in your own ideas of the continent and your own determination to pursue clearer ways of seeing that affirm ways of living and, most importantly, validate ways of being. Thank you.